Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kristen. I'm the Integro webinar moderator. On the line with me today, I have two presenters. We have John Frost and Debbie Tad. John Frost is the Vice President of Sales here at Integro. He has over 25 years of experience in ECM and information governance. And Debbie Tad is one of our customers at BBVA Compass. John will introduce her here in a moment. Today, they're going to be talking about a hybrid cloud solution for you guys and share Debbie's experience at BBVA with their deployment. Before I let John take it away, I do have a few quick notes for you guys. First, ask us questions. I know John and Debbie, they'll love to answer your questions, and they will answer those questions at the end of this presentation. So ask your questions in the question box in the sidebar at any time. And also, John and Debbie have two polls for you guys today, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for those polling questions. I know one is coming up here very soon. We'll run through those quickly, but we want to make sure you have time to provide your responses. So without any further ado, John, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in today. I want to introduce my co-speaker today, which is Debbie Tad. Debbie Tad is the Vice President of Information Lifecycle Management at BBVA Compass. She has a pretty long history in IT and in information governance, starting her career out at Novell. And she's really involved with electronic records management tools and processes and building programs for financial institutions. So thank you for joining us today, Debbie.
Thank you.
So today what we're going to be covering with you, we're going to have an overview of BBVA information governance. Debbie's going to cover that, and I'll cover with you some of the solution drivers and project scope, some of the tools we deployed. Then Debbie will tell you the lessons learned that BBVA found. I'll tell you some of the lessons learned that Integro came out of doing the project with BBVA, and then some joint best practices, both with some of the applications and overall for the program that we've built as part of this. So with that, I'm going to have Kristen do the first poll for us.
Awesome. I just launched that for you guys. John, would you like me to read the question?
Sure.
Question for you guys that you can submit your votes on now. Is your organization focused on information governance programs that include both structured and unstructured data? There are a couple of answers for you guys. You can say yes, no, or you're focused on structured data only or unstructured data only. I can see about 45% of you guys have voted, so let's just get a few more votes in and I'll close down the poll. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let me share the results here. John, can you see the results?
I cannot see the results, but that's okay.
I can.
We have 69% answered yes, they are working on both structured and unstructured data for their information governance programs. 8% said no, they do not have an IG program. 15% said they're focused on structured data only, and 8% said we are focused on unstructured data only.
Fantastic. So as you can see, with 69% of you have needs around structured and unstructured. So gone are the days where we dealt with one side of the house or the other. Most organizations and a lot of ones that we're running into at Integro are seeing we're seeing a more of a unified approach where we're needing to bring the processes, programs, and strategies together, looking at our organizations as a cohesive unit of information that we need to manage. And my co-speaker, Debbie, she was one of the forerunners of that and has always been big into that type of approach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie and let her tell you a little bit about BBVA and the work that she started there.
Thank you. So we had IBM come in and do an assessment using the generally accepted record-keeping principles that was published by ARMA. And what we found was that we have a pretty good paper process where we can apply retention to our paper files, but we were really struggling in managing the data. And I don't think that that's probably too shocking. A lot of people are in that same boat. We also discovered we have 2.5 petabytes of data. That's both our structured and our unstructured data. We have regulations, because we're a financial institution, we have a lot of regulations that govern that data. And we needed to be able to identify what we had, classify it, build some structure around it, and work on putting together a disposition process for all of our data. So that's kind of where we started with, and we knew we were not limited in, or we weren't unique in this need. So some of the solution drivers that we had, we wanted to see how we manage structured versus unstructured. Those are very different. We, as a company, have moved to Google Mail and Google Sites, and so how can we address the retention and maintenance of those cloud repositories? How do we retire SharePoint? That was one of the things that still is on our roadmap that we want to retire. But we have several sites that have a tremendous amount of data that's stored in SharePoint as a collaborative and a repository, just a long-term repository, because they didn't have room on their file shares. We also have a tremendous amount of data in our file shares. We don't, because we've had so many acquisitions over the last several years, we don't have standards. We just kind of dumped all of the data out on the isilon and said, there it is. So that's a major challenge for us, is we don't have a standard of where data is stored and being able to go to a certain area and find what we're looking for. We also have a lot of systems that we've retired. Again, with those acquisitions, we migrated the data from their systems into ours, but there was still some historical data that's in those retired systems that we need to address. And then we also need to address the active growth of the databases and systems that we have. How are we going to address that to increase productivity and mitigate some of the risks that are associated with having that data growth? So the solution was, well, the project started with my team. Because we have more of the records management and lifecycle type of expertise, we decided that we were the ones that would start this project. However, we absolutely needed IT's cooperation and collaboration. So we decided that we were going to have a corporate-wide governance program for both structured and unstructured, and email, which is considered semi-structured. We wanted to centralize our retention policies so that we could have a central place that would federate to the other repositories that we have. We also needed to document the citations where applicable to the retention policies that we have, so that our users would feel comfortable and confident knowing that those regulations are documented and the retention is based off of those regulations. We needed a way to do some auto classification. We still need to, but we're working on organizing our file shares and identifying what is application data, what is departmental shared data, what is user data, and trying to put some meaningful metadata around that so that it's easier to identify and classify. We need to archive our SharePoint data. We need to be able to turn that off. We also need something for our cleanup, but also, a place that we can draw a line in the sand, and now we have this day forward process while we do all of this cleanup. So there's a lot of things that we needed to do to build into the scope of this project. And we needed a vendor who has that experience and can work with us, because even though I don't think we're unique in the fact that we're not managing all of this data as well as we could be, we do have our own unique challenges. And so having somebody who had that kind of experience with the tools that we have and understood the challenges that we had was definitely our biggest priority.
So with that, BBVA turned to Integro to help start this process. It's a large program, multi-phase project that we've been working with BBVA now on for close to 2 years. And they viewed us as a trusted advisor. So it was our job to understand features and capabilities of the solutions and applications that they were wanting to deploy, help them to develop some repetitive processes, especially around file share, processing file shares, getting the content out of file shares and into record-keeping systems, as well as to do SharePoint archiving. And we want to provide and are continuing to provide self-sufficiency in maintaining and expanding the system. So making sure that as Integro comes in and assists with the deployment, that as we pull out, BBVA has full ownership and are fully trained in managing the overall system as a result. So with that, we currently have a delighted client, I'm happy to say, and BBVA, of course, is a model unified governance program for not only their corporation, but for other financial institutions. So currently we're in about to start a phase 3 of a multi-phase project, and so things have been going quite well, both on the structured and unstructured side. So what tools do we use for this solution? So in this specific solution, we used the IBM suite of products, everything from Atlas Global Retention and Policy Schedule Management to FileNet for repository, IBM Enterprise Records, IBM Stored IQ, the Content Collector for files and SharePoint, IBM Content Classification, Content Navigator, the Navigator for Microsoft Office interface, and IBM Optum for structured data archiving, as well as we partner with Estuate, who is a longtime IBM structured data partner, to bring in their ArcLens to do a lot of the Optum work and to bring in their ArcLens product. ArcLens allows us to view and work with attachments in the structured area. Most of the solution we did was a unique solution in that BBVA had the need to deploy this in the cloud, and AWS was their cloud vendor. So working with those instructions, Integro deployed this entire solution with the exception of global retention in AWS. The only exception is on-premise is the global retention policy schedule management database. We have to sit that on-premise, but everything else for the solution does sit on the cloud and feeds back into their internal systems. So our solution-based engagements, we needed to provide compliance and centralized retention policies. So Atlas was able to do that for us. The Global Retention and Policy Schedule Management provided those policies. Then we leveraged the Atlas to IER and are leveraging the Atlas to Optum connector. And what those connectors should do, allow us to publish those schedules out to the enforcement tools. So Enterprise Record and Optum are doing the policy enforcement. And the connector allows us to take those, the enforcement mechanisms within those policies and push those out to those specific applications. Atlas, we use an Atlas feed utility to bring the HR data into the tables for some potential future use in hold management. And the Atlas tool, they had a previous application called Rules Mapper. And with Rules Mapper, the Atlas Global Retention actually replaces that Rules Mapper for policy. And they're using now Atlas for the corporate retention syndication tool. So as we're looking to go forward with other systems of record, the Atlas Global Retention will serve as the policy management piece and the citation management piece, while they can syndicate those policies or the enforcement of those policies out to the native tools. We use Stored IQ in conjunction with content classification. So taking care of the file share data, we built structures with the file shares, content structures. Then we leveraged Stored IQ with content classification to help bring those into enterprise records and classify those properly for proper retention of anything that was deemed records. It had standard metadata fields that were used for all the archival documents. So what we were able to do is grab some of the metadata fields and pump based on the structure that we had in the folder structure. We were able to grab some of that folder structure content to serve as the metadata to go into FileNet so that we could properly classify and assign retention. Debbie, do you have anything to add on that?
Nope, you covered it well.
Thanks. So basically, a little bit of breakdown of the solution. So ICC for Files provided the task routes for bringing the content from the file shares into FileNet, into IER, so that we could properly classify them in IER. Content Navigators being used for templates and manual ingestion. So when end users are needed to declare records into the system, they're using Content Navigator. The file share folder structure, of course, we built the folder structure so it had record category and triggering information built into the structure. And so as we're consuming that content, it's pulling the metadata off of that structure. And Navigator for Microsoft Office is going to provide future day forward use in conjunction with Navigator templates so that users can be directly in Microsoft Office and declare some of their content as records as needed. Excuse me, as Debbie indicated earlier with SharePoint, they were needing to break down SharePoint and take record data out of SharePoint. And so in doing that, similar to what we did with the file shares, we did build some structure to grab some of the metadata out of SharePoint and then pass that content through ICC for SharePoint and into FileNet Enterprise Records to manage record content. Currently, the FileNet P8 system is the system of record. They're not using P8 for any business type practices or policies or processes at this point. It's strictly the records repository. In future phases, we're discussing the possibility of opening it up for business use. But right now, it was deemed to be the system as record and wanted specifically to be used as a system of record to make sure that we're keeping corporate records contained in a central location. The Enterprise Records tool is being used to protect and manage those records. So with P8, you have the content objects themselves in the repository, and with Enterprise Records, you're providing the governance around that content. Atlas Global Retention, as we said already, is the policy syndication tool. Content Navigator being the place that users go to navigate through records, add new records, etc. And then Optum and ArcLens are being used for structured data to archive structured data as well as to view attachments within that structured data. Right now, let's go ahead and do a second poll.
Awesome. I will launch that now. Okay, guys, poll question has been launched. You can submit your votes. The question is your organization planning to migrate your systems from an on-prem to cloud environment? Responses are yes, no, or we have already done so. See, 40% have voted. Let's just get a few more in. We have the majority. Awesome, guys. Thank you for your votes. I'll close that now and share the results. So it looks like we have 55% that said yes, you are working on and or planning the migration right now. And 45% said no, we do not have plans at this time to move from
That's about what I expected. So there has been a lot of hesitancy in the past to move towards cloud infrastructure, but that's rapidly changing. A lot more of your organizations are going to be coming to you with the need or the want or the strategy to move to cloud. It is becoming an extremely safe platform for storing critical content in organizations. The security is there, the tools are there. Most of the major vendors have their wares put in there now. So if you're not dealing with it now, you will probably be dealing with it relatively soon in the next year to 2 years. So Okay, so next is Debbie. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the lessons that we've learned so far on the project from the BBVA side?
Okay, I think it's kind of a no-brainer that if you don't have C-level approval and support, that you're not going to make a lot of headway. And we found that to be very true with this project. The other thing that we found was culture shock. Like I said, not a lot of people knew who we were unless they dealt with a lot of paper. And so for us to come out of the paper world and into the data world, we needed to build some trust with our users, that they knew that they were, that they could trust who we were, what we were doing, why we were doing it. We found that people want to do the right thing. They just need to know that everything has been blessed by the proper people. So when we publish our retention schedule, we let them know that we've checked with legal and compliance, and we've gotten their blessing for what the retention should be. We needed to streamline our kickoff meetings so that they were smaller groups of people that we could work with. One of our biggest issues was that we couldn't find somebody who had done this process before, especially when it comes to the shared drive cleanup. We couldn't find anybody who we could learn from. And so we kind of had to make our own plan and go with it. And so that was a lot of trial and error. We, throw out an idea and then we'd present it to our user group, and we'd find that wouldn't quite work. So there was a lot of iterations of trying to fine tune what that process was going to be. And so a lot of that has to do with the way that we set up the file structure to be able to ingest the folder names as pieces of metadata into FileNet. The other thing, we did a lot of trial and error with templates. And so just understanding what your big picture is before you get down into the weeds was very important for us. And then we also had to put deadlines for our users. They have full-time jobs, and managing data was not really forefront in their mind. And so giving them a deadline to, do at least 30%. Okay, now let's do another 30%, that kind of thing, to just keep them on task was really important. So one of our biggest successes, when we acquired a bank several years ago, there was some issues with the FDIC, and they requested that we put all of the data that we had from that acquisition on hold until they told us we could release it. And just before the holidays last year, we received a message from the FDIC asking if we knew where that data was and could we pinpoint any information. And the acquisition was several years ago, like 9 years old. And so with all the turnover, we didn't have anybody who was here when we made that acquisition. And so when they asked, all our storage people and our IT people said, yes, it's out there on the Isilon, but I can't tell you what's where. So because we had installed Stored IQ, we thought, what the heck, let's point it at that repository and see if we can find the information that they're asking for. So we let that run. I think it took about 12 or 14 days to go against a 50 terabyte area, and it indexed all of the data. So now if the FDIC comes back and says, hey, can you show me all of the information that Debbie Tad created, then we can pinpoint that, and that was a big win for us. The other thing that we've been able to do is search for PCI information so that we can get our PCI certification faster. And we really anticipate that Stored IQ is going to be a big help to us for GDPR.
Okay. And on the Integro side, a lot of ours were technical lessons learned. So when you're deploying on-prem software virtually hosted through something like AWS, what we figured out with the AWS environment is highly locked down. So when you're when you're trying to deploy this stuff, there are going to be, you're used to standard ports that you're using on an on-prem environment, and you have to rework those because you have to identify those ports up front that need to be opened. And you have to do that for each of the solution components that you're working, and then work with AWS to make all that work, basically, so you can get in and out of the firewall with the tools. The IBM software requirements. What we were found, because we were dealing with on-prem stuff that we were putting in the cloud, some of the requirements were not necessarily supported in AWS. So one of the things, and one of the reasons we kept the Atlas database on-prem was it required an enterprise version of Oracle, and BBVA had an RDS version. So we had to keep that on-prem and make things work back and forth through the cloud. Some of the scripts that are provided for installation, et cetera, required a workaround on our part to get those things in place and up and running. But in the end, we got it all working and functioning properly. The storage in AWS, the storage, you need to know the storage up front. They have about 8 different models of storage. With BBVA, we use the Glacier storage model. I'm sorry, the Glacier storage model, what we found of the 8, my apologies, of the 8, what we found was that the Glacier was not compatible with the IBM application. So we used a different storage model. You need to know that up front and what you're going to choose when you're dealing with somebody like AWS. They'll have different pricing and level models and support models. The storage price considerations during the deployment. So when you're deploying these things, of course, of those 8 models, they all have a different price range, and so you have to work that into your budget. So getting that nailed down as quickly as possible near the front of the project is very helpful. For ICC for files, BBVA had to reorganize their files into a new structure. This was the first time in dealing with these kind of things, and as Debbie explained to you, nobody done it before. So they were very patient, and we worked together as a team and built this model for handling the restructure of the file shares in order to leverage the best pieces of the technology to get stuff integrated within and ingested within the FileNet environment and declared as records. With classification, you want good, clean sample documents. This is something that Integro, this is a general best practice of Integro that we work with our customers when working with content classification. When you're dealing with any kind of a classification tool or machine learning tool, the cleaner the samples, the better. The most liked documents and electronically sourced documents, the better. So if you want to build these knowledge bases to handle the classification or the machine learning, the cleaner the sample and the more accurate the sample set, the better and more accurate your knowledge base is going to be. And one thing we learned that worked very well for us with this one was we broke up the different functional areas in BBVA from a content perspective, and we created separate knowledge bases for each of those areas. So each department basically had its own knowledge base that the machine only had to focus on types of content created by that area. And it created a much more accurate knowledge base for use in the organization. The retention schedules essentially maintain an atlas, and they govern the retention for both the structured and unstructured data. So it's a really good tool for having your overall policy managed in a central location, and then you manage the actual policies from there. So the legal citations, et cetera, are managed with an atlas. Then you push out the enforcement pieces of that policy into your governing tools. So it served very well for BBVA. The connectors deploy both for IER and for Optum, so we're allowed to use it and are able to use it for both our unstructured and our structured data in this instance. So some final best practices. Some of these are overall, some of these are specific to applications. Level set your goals and objectives with the relevant groups during the project kickoff. So make sure that everybody's in alignment from a program perspective of what the goals and objectives are, and agree to those goals and objectives when you start the project. From our perspective, we help the client, and it's our job to help the client create the big picture technically. They have a program that they put in place. They have strategies, they have policies, they have procedures. We have to take all of that as Integro, translate that into the technology solution. So we have to paint that big technical picture and then take them through the steps on how to achieve that big picture technically. The retention strategy and policy needs to be defined before any technical deployment. So you really need to have your schedules and policies in place or in movement before you go throwing technology at it, because you can end up delaying yourself by not doing that. Help the client understand the solution component. So what you want to do is, even though they may be proficient in records management, the way that the IBM Enterprise Records handles records management as opposed to competing products is going to be very different. So it's our job to train Debbie and her team and understand and help them translate and understand functionality and how that functionality addresses their needs specifically. Because when you're deploying this kind of things, a lot of times the team will have something in their minds that they want to accomplish, and when it comes out technically, it looks very different from what they had in mind. So working with them to address that. Helping them understand available functionalities in each solution component and how they can be utilized. So basically trying to stay ahead. This is a challenge for any vendor, but trying to stay ahead of the customer in understanding the functionality of the tool and saying, teaching them up front, this is how it could potentially be applied for different scenarios. So when they have immediate needs or pain points, you can come right to them and say, yeah, well, yeah, you can use this piece of functionality. It may or may not be designed for that, but you can actually use this for this piece to address your need. And help them know what they don't know. Anticipate the questions, educate them so they make the right decisions. There's a lot of technology being deployed here, and so ensuring that we're on the latest patch levels and those kind of things, and ensuring that we understand the different functionality of those patch levels and address that with the customer so that they can make important decisions on the future of their program and how they're moving through these phases is very important. Then conducting knowledge transfer and training sessions to properly enable them. So Integro, of course, takes a mentoring approach where we're mentoring our clients all the way through the technical deployments. In addition, we do provide the hands-on trainings or what buttons to push when type training as we need to the customer so that they can fully own the solution. And then the last, as I mentioned earlier, was to create department-specific knowledge bases. When you're dealing with IBM content classification, you want to create these department-specific or function-specific knowledge bases. It makes your content classifying a lot more accurate and a lot easier to use. So with that, I'd like to wrap up, and thank you very much for your time. Right now, we'll entertain questions, Kristen.
Awesome, John. Thank you. And just so everyone on the line knows, we are past the half-hour mark, so if you need to jump off, that's totally fine. This session is being recorded, so you can have access to that here shortly. Question for you, John and Debbie. Why did BBVA choose to retire SharePoint versus using it for records?
We never really used SharePoint for records. It was for a collaborative environment, and we chose to go to Google Sites. So we wanted to use Google Sites as an intranet type of environment instead of a repository for storing bulk data.
Okay, great. I'll ask one more question for you, Debbie. What is up next in your program?
So as John said, we're getting ready to start phase 3. We are still actively working in the other phases. Phase 1 was installing all of the software. Phase 2 was starting to look at our unstructured data and moving it into FileNet. Phase 3 is around our structured data. So we have started doing retirement of our databases, and now we're getting ready to start that growth management, data growth management portion of it, where we will start to address historical data and decreasing the size of our databases. After that, we expect to move on to our mainframe and start looking at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, John, for being on this call today and sharing your experience that you've had with information governance. I will let you close out, John, and thank you again to the audience.
All right.
Thank you.
Again, everybody. Yep. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participation in the polls, and we hope this was very helpful in your planning for your structured and unstructured governance programs. Please don't hesitate to contact Debbie or I if we can be of further help. And everybody have a great day. Thank you.